Hello YouTube! Today, by popular demand, I'm finally going to be reviewing a program by Mike Israetel, who is widely renowned for making good hypertrophy training templates. The one I selected is an old template from 2019 because even though I know that you guys wanted me to review the male physique template, the thing is, it's behind a paywall and it's $100. I'm certainly not going to pay $100, and on top of that, it's not accessible to you because you also most likely will prefer free programs. So this one is free, it's in the description, and it's available on the internet. The second reason why I favor this program is because the male physique template is layered in things like mesocycles, low volume phases, and deloads that I think are useless for hypertrophy. And therefore, I would rather review something that's straightforward so that I don't waste time explaining concepts to you that you can learn from directly if you just truly want to listen about it from Mike. Whereas today I can focus entirely on seeing whether he makes good programs or not and helping you develop an eye for good programs to understand what works and what simply doesn't. These concepts, for the most part, tend to be slapped on top of the program. Yes, they help the program work, but if the program cannot function without them, for the most part, it's a bad program because you can always bet on the fact that the trainee is going to mess up, they're not going to respect certain parameters, or they're just going to straight up modify the program, which should be done. You should have a spirit of innovation when you approach a program. So all of these overcomplicated things slapped on, for the most part, tend to just weight the program down. But if someone wants to link me those programs, I can review them, not to share them for free, but rather to explain to you why blogs for hypertrophy are useless and overkill. Another thing that I think is important as we go into the reviews, that you understand where I'm coming from, is that you don't need to understand hypertrophy to get big. You don't need to understand every single concept, and you certainly don't need to understand every single program. Sometimes some program needs you to get certain aspects like reps in reserve or RPE because these are auto-regulating factors. But for the most part, I believe that a program should stand on its own. You should be able to run it as is without listening to explanations, and it should function. Nowadays, too many times, influencers slap ebooks or lengthy explanations along with their program to explain the way the mechanisms are supposed to be run. But if your program is so complex that I need to read the equivalent of the Bible for it to work, in my opinion, it's not a good program, or if it is, it's for very advanced lifters that need that complexity and flexibility, which is 1% of the audience, maybe even less. And since you are not concerned by that, we are going to focus on something that is much simpler and therefore also much more efficient. Keep in mind that influencers are also human beings with an ego. Sometimes, I'm not saying that Mike does that, but sometimes people are trying to make their programs much more complex than they should be because they want to appear smart. This is simply not needed. My stance is I should be able to scribble the program on the corner of a table at a shitty restaurant somewhere high up, tear the table down at the end of the dinner, hand you the program, and that's it. You can run it as is. You don't need to read an ebook. It stands on its own. This is the trademark of any good program. If in 5,000 years all of the information surrounding the program is lost, the program is still good. This goes for my programs. They work as templates. You don't need to watch the videos, and therefore I apply the same principles for every single program I review. So this one is no different. This is an hypertrophy program, of course, and it is a 6 days a week upper-lower program. Now, I say 6 days a week because there is a rest day. So technically it's 7 days, meaning that all of you guys that ask me for 7 days programs that I've never recreated, there you go. This might be the one for you because you're going to do it from Monday to Sunday and then start again on Monday. You just get one rest day per week. So it's going to be super high frequency. And because of that, we're also going again to get a good look at Mike's programming abilities because apparently he's a genius. To make an hypertrophy program that is 7 days a week work, you need to be fairly good. The more days, the more interaction between the days. So we're going to see. I'm very interested. Of course, I already did my review, so I already know what I'm going to share with you. But I'm certain that some of you guys are already salivating because, as you know, I'm extremely critical. I have very high standards for programming. And therefore, when someone is touted as the second coming of Jesus Christ, I'm going to be extremely hard on them. So The program is supposed to be run for 5 weeks, which we're going to ignore again because it's a parameter that is simply not needed. If a program is good, you can run it forever until you need to step on to the next stage and you modify the program. And the last week is supposedly a deload, which I'll ignore as well. These things are important to say because throughout the 5 weeks, the sets and reps evolve. That's not a bad thing per se, it's volume manipulation. The way I do it is with evolving sets and rep range, and that way I'm also going to be able to modify the program myself to tell you, for example, that on that lift I would prefer or favor that rep range over this rep range. This is going to be my replacement. This is not what Mike is doing. So mostly I'm going to focus on the exercise selection, the frequency, the way the split is scheduled, because this is technically a body part split. It's not really an upper-lower, it's a fake upper-lower or a gentleman split. I'm certain that Mike would never call that, but that's what I would call it because it's exactly the way I program. And we're also going to, of course, focus on volume and intensity manipulation, which is the most important thing when we talk about hypertrophy. So let's get into it. The first day of the program is going to be mostly upper body, and you're going to start with a barbell bench press, 4 sets of 8 reps. I have nothing against that. That's an excellent lift to open a day, a heavy compound. Follow that up with an overhead press, barbell overhead press, 3 sets of 8. I also have nothing against that. Excellent. Horizontal press, vertical press. You have 2 compounds that take care of a lot of muscles. You're going to have gotten a lot of work done from these 2 lifts alone. For the rep ranges in this case, I would say that something like a 6 to 8 for the barbell bench press and maybe a 5 to 8 for the overhead press, or maybe an 8 to 10 could also work perfectly well. It depends on what you prefer. After that, triceps, you do weighted dips. Now we're going to enter into the territory of potential junk volume because a weighted dip, depending on how you position the torso, is either going to be mostly shoulders and triceps or shoulders and chest or only triceps if you go only halfway down. This means that you're already pre-fatigued from the barbell bench press. In this position, what I prefer to do is a rotation. So if you want to open with a heavy barbell bench press, what you can do is you can do triceps dips or just normal dips, but without the weight for volume. And on days where you want to do weighted dips, you open with the weighted dips, and then you're going to do your barbell bench press, or maybe just standard push-ups for volume. So you're going to allow the volume and intensity to be manipulated by the rotation. That way you are going to prioritize the main lift, and you're still going to get the volume needed. Now we are at a moment where the chest is already extremely fatigued. So I would say that we have 1 more chest exercise left, and after that it's junk volume. The next exercise is cable flies. 4 sets of 12, okay? Cable fly in isolation, more focus on the chest. Your chest is already pretty cooked at this point, and you also just did a chest exercise. So I'm not sure if the position of the exercise in the day is a good idea or not. But that is actually the last chest exercise for the day. So we're good. It's still a bit junky, but not too bad. Then it's a barbell shrug, okay? 5 sets of 10, I actually quite like this. High volume for the shrugs. I will even go as far as to say that 5 sets of 10 to 15 might be indicated, maybe 5 to 4 sets if you want to manipulate the sets as well. High volume, you shrug, all good. Then you do barbell upright rows, which is a great lift if you do it properly and you have the proper mobility. 3 sets of 10, good as well, nothing wrong with that. This is a more direct exercise for the shoulder, more isolation and more stimulus as well for the traps. Again, I'm not a fan of the positioning because why do shrugs and the upright rows right afterwards? We're going to see that I'm going to manipulate the way the exercises are done because the position is not optimal in my opinion. Then you do some easy bar curls, 3 sets of 8, love it. Direct work for the bicep, it's always good to see. And then some abs, okay? So good point. There is ab isolation in the program. 3 sets of 10, and you do machine crunches, all right? I'm not a fan of the machine crunch. Many people overuse the lower back. If you know how to use it, use it. I would prefer something with a stretch because you do a ton of bracing already. So something like a leg raise, something like a sit-up, all of that on a decline bench. This, in my opinion, would be better. All right, so this is a solid day, all right? Lots of compound movements and then isolation. As you know, I favor and prefer a wide selection of exercises on upper body. Your upper body movements and upper body days should look like a laundry list, and this looks like it to me. He didn't bank entirely on intensity and be minimalistic, and he didn't do too much. You know, those guys who make you do like 5 variations of like cable flies, and it's just boring and it does nothing. He didn't fall for that trap. There is a focus on the traps, the shoulder, and the chest, of course, but it's a fairly balanced day. What I would do is the thing with the dips, as I just told you, and then we can reorganize the other exercises so that it makes more sense. What could be done is you follow the weighted dips directly by some easy bar curls, and you can superset them with the barbell shrugs. And then what we can do is maybe a giant set of the machine crunches, the cable flies, and the upright rows. That way we separate the trap movement, we give some time for the chest to recover from all of the exercises that open the day, and we create some distance between the two. This is something that I encourage you to do. Play with programs. Fuck people who say, oh, don't touch my program. Again, if a program is destroyed by one exercise being moved one slot, it's a bad program. So that was for the first day. Nothing much to say now. You're going to see that I'm going to take some of the indications and some of the details from that day and make a little conclusion after we go through day 2. So for day 2, you're going to do a lower body with still some upper body thrown into the mix. And you open with high bar squats. So that's a quad movement, as Mike stipulates. 4 sets of 8. Excellent rep range. If you wanted to do an evolving rep range for this one, I would say 4 sets of 4 to 8 if you want a wide range, 4 sets of 6 to 8 if you want to be conservative. You will have noticed at this point that every single time I make an evolving rep range, for the most part, I go down. So I take the number that Mike gave us and I go down with it. So if he gives me an 8, it's 8 to 6 or 8 to 4. I never do 8 to 10 or 8 to 12. And this is because Mike has a propensity towards volume. He prefers volume in his program. He's a volume guy. This ability to tell the quirks of the person who programs is extremely precious because it allows you to correct what could be potentially mistakes that don't align with your needs. I, for myself, I'm also a volume guy, meaning that if you take one of my programs, you can take down some volume and it might be better for you. This is the same here. Develop this ability. It's going to really save you some time and some trouble. So I'll do the same thing here. We go down with the squats. Then he does some leg press. 6 sets of 10. That's a lot of volume. That is a little bit too much volume in my opinion. You are already fatigued from the high bar squats. What is the need of doing 16 reps? So what we're going to do is only 3 to 4 sets and maybe 8 to 12 reps instead. And that should do the trick. The quads at this point are tired. I do not want to see more quad work or else it's going to be junk volume. You follow that up with calves on leg press. 5 sets of 8. High set selection, but it's calves. If you want to train calves, there are 2 ways to go about it. Low volume, medium intensity, high frequency, or medium to high volume, medium intensity, low frequency. Either way works. I favor high frequency. He favors medium frequency and high volume. I have nothing against that, that's fine. Then some front delts. All right. Again, another propensity of Mike is he has an hyper-focus on shoulders. This is his preference, but it transpires in the way he programs for people. If you don't have that preference, you're going to do way too much shoulder work. Keep in mind that you already worked shoulders on day 1. Maybe not directly with isolation, although I would say that a barbell upright row still works the shoulder. But all of the presses you did tired you. You're going to do after that a seated dumbbell overhead press. Do you think that you'll recover? You did barbell standing press on day 1. I think that this is poor programming because you're already fatigued here. So this doesn't have a spot here. You can slash it, like quite literally slash it. It's not going to take away from the program. If anything, it's going to be better because you're going to get more recovery. You will find that there is a shit ton of direct shoulder volume elsewhere in the program. So this can just go. After that, traps again, dumbbell bench shrug. We already did traps on day 1. Why more trap work? I think this is a little bit overkill. And when you see that after that you do barbell upright rows again, it's confusing. Why so much isolation? Well, it might be because you want gigantic traps and gigantic shoulders. But for a natural lifter, I think that this is too much. So I would quite literally tell you to just not do these days. And then you see EZ Bar Curls. So at this point, it looks like a shadow clone of day 1. The way I see the program, this is day 1 and day 2. I'm not tripping, right? This is not a rotation. It's not something that is supposed to come in and out. You are supposed to train biceps, shoulders, and traps back to back on day 1 and day 2. I don't think it's doable. So in this case, day 2 needs to go somewhere else. The reason why this happened, and there's so much volume and even double volume in this case is because Mike did something called front loading in this program, meaning that he has you do a ton of volume on day 1 and day 2, then you do a day of rest, and then you do more days that have much less volume. So you do almost as much volume in day 1 and day 2 as you do in day 4, 5, 6, and 7. This is a practice that is perfectly fine, but if it ends up turning into junk volume like it does here, it's not a good idea. What I would say instead is, on day 2, instead of doing traps and shoulders again and doing biceps again, why not do some long head of the tricep? The long head of the tricep receives almost no love in this program. Why not do some forearms? The forearms never get isolated once in the program. Why not do some neck? The neck is not included in the program. See, Mike is decent at programming. This is from 2019, so he's evolving, of course, like we all are. He isolates abs, and he tells you to do it as well, but he fails to make you isolate other body parts that also need it. And I know that his stance has evolved, because I've seen a video about him talking about forearm isolation, but it's not reflected in this template. And I also know that, because I checked the stats, the Google stats, most people who Google programs by Mike end up with this program. So even if it's outdated, maybe it is, but most people still jump on it. So the correction I would offer for you guys, the viewer, is instead of doing the seated dumbbell overhead press, we're going to do some French press instead for the long head of the tricep. Instead of doing dumbbell bench shrug, we're going to do some finger curls for the forearms. And instead of doing barbell upright row, we are going to be doing some neck curls. And the rest, like the EZ bar curl, we won't do, and you just go home. That is it for the day. It's still a spectacular day. A ton of work was done. You have accumulated a shit ton of volume from day 1 and day 2. And then we can simply go home, relax, rest, and come back. Overall, the conclusion from these 2 days is that it's solid, it's good mix of compound and isolation, but an overzealous attitude towards certain muscle groups, an over-isolation of certain body parts, and a complete lack of isolation for others, with an overall focus on volume that could mean that the program is lacking in intensity. The total volume is too high, as I said, and on top of that, the balance between upper and lower, and this is something that you're going to see later, is also skewed towards lower body, because if you compare the exercise selection and the number of exercises done in a day, you will find that the lower body gets a lot of work, maybe too much. So what I would say is, since again the total volume is too high, to slightly reduce the lower volume. And therefore, you don't have to touch the upper body volume, it can stay the same. The overall volume goes down, and it's going to be much easier to handle. Because I'm going to be honest with you, this is a lot. I don't know many people who could handle that amount of volume, unless you really sandbag, unless you really do reps in reserve. But in this case, why? Why not just be a little bit more intense and save time? You need the alliance of both intensity and volume. All right, so let's move on. After your rest day, which is day 3, you're going to do your day 4, and you're going to start with a sumo deficit deadlift. So it's technically a lower body day again. You could ask, well, why are you doing a day 2 lower and a day 4 lower? And the answer is because you have to make a choice. The choice is simple. Day 4, day 5, day 6, and day 7 are going to be 3 days that are technically lower, but with a smidgen of upper, and then 1 dedicated upper body day. Again, a bias. This is a bias of Mike. He has a bias towards lower body. And if you look at his body, makes sense. His lower body is dominant. Do you want your lower body to be dominant? If the answer is no, you're going to have to reduce lower body volume because, again, you do way too much of that. So, for day 4, sumo deficit deadlift, 4 sets of 8. This is typically not a lift I would program because all variations of the sumo tend to be best suited for people who pull sumo. And that also is the case for conventional. This doesn't mean that you can't do them, but it means that you are entering the programming process with the preconceived notion that the guy has a technical skill to pull sumo. Because to pull deficit, you need to already know how to pull sumo. So maybe you can do a conventional deficit deadlift instead. Sumo is good, it's going to mostly target the glutes. Then you do an hamstring movement, which is the stiff leg deadlift. Now, we are running into a crossroad because I've watched videos from Mike about stiff leg deadlift, and when he speaks about it, he speaks about Romanian deadlifts. I don't know if it's just lost in translation or a problem with semantics. I don't know which one you're supposed to do. I think that in this case, a Romanian deadlift would make much more sense. And on top of that, if it's a Romanian deadlift, you can just not do the sumo. You can open with the Romanian deadlift, 3 sets of 8, you can do 4 sets of 8 to 12, and that's it. That's your heavy hip hinge for the day. Takes care of the lower back, takes care of the glutes, takes care of the hamstrings, and everything is good. If you love stiff leg deadlifts, do them, understand that a stiff leg is more strength-oriented because it's a better accessory for the deadlift, and a Romanian deadlift is more hypertrophy-oriented because there is more stretch. Then you do some barbell bent rows. I'm not a fan of pulling then doing rows on the same day because some people don't have the integrity on the lower back to do that. However, it is still a possibility. What could be done is a rotation of the stiff leg deadlift, or even something different, you replace the sumo deficit deadlift by the barbell bent row. I think this would even make more sense. That way you enter the movement fresh. If you don't want to do that, you can just replace that by dumbbell rows or by seal rows. Seal rows being superior because they don't tax the lower back. And it's 4 sets of 8. Love it. It's important that the rep range for rows, especially barbell rows, is high because you don't want to ego lift on that. Then you do pull-ups as fast as possible for 30 reps. I think in this case, if you really want the trainee to just do pull-ups without weight, you can just let them do an AMRAP and not tell them to adopt a certain tempo because I think it's just a waste of time. Also, I see only 1 set here. Why not do 4 sets? AMRAPs on calisthenics with only body weight is not going to be very tiring, especially if the tempo is low. And then you do abs, machine crunches. Again, he loves those machine crunches. I think that they are really inferior for hypertrophy. I would prefer you actually do the best exercise for hypertrophy for the abs, which is sit-ups on a decline bench that you wait for reps, for 10 to 15 reps. That is the way to go. Or some leg raises, some V sit-ups, something different than that. 4 sets of 15, tons of volume for the abs, excellent. Now, if you look at that day, it's a small day, and you can tell me, well, that's not enough. No, that's excellent. If you want a lower body day, that's how a lower body day should look. So if I revamp it the way I told you to do it, barbell bent row, followed by Romanian deadlift, followed by pull-ups, followed by machine crunches. That's it. That's a good day. And if you truly want to open with the Romanian, you can do seal rows afterwards again. For this one, you don't need to superset anything. You could superset the pull-ups with the machine crunches. And if I were to go back, because I completely forgot, for the other lower body day on day 2, some things can also be supersetted, although I would never superset squats or leg press, maybe leg press and calves, because you're supposed to do leg press and calves on leg press, but it's going to be a bitch. You're going to have to remove the weight, so maybe don't superset that. But after that, you do have your French press, you have your finger curls, and then you have your neck work, and you can do a giant set out of that. So that was for day 4. Then we're going to talk about day 5. Day 5 is another bonified upper body day, which is very important because the lower body volume is very important. So the upper body has to match it, or else you're going to end up with a big imbalance. You open with an incline cross grip bench. Love that lift. It's underrated. Not many people do it. I would recommend you give it a try. I'm not a fan of incline presses because people think that it's like a bench and an overhead press together. No, it's an hybrid. It does a little bit of both, but what it does well. So give it a try. 4 sets of 10. This one rep range I wouldn't even touch. Maybe 4 sets of 6 to 10 if you want the evolution. Again, when I give the evolution, I always go down, even for upper body lifts. Chest, after that, you follow up with another exercise for the development of the pectoral with a wide grip push-up as fast as possible again. Why? Let the trainee go at their own pace. Let them do 4 sets of as many reps as possible. And then you do your overhead EZ bar extension. Okay, great. The first long of the tricep exercise without my intervention. But then what do I see? As many reps as possible. Meaning that the intensity is going to be poo-poo. Why? 8 to 12. That way the guy goes to failure with relevant weight for 4 sets. That's the way to go. It's the one long of the tricep exercise. Why make it so that it's going to be junk volume? And then incline cross grip bench superset. That is okay for as many reps as possible because it's the exercise that follows the overhead extension because it's a superset with the same weight. So this way, this time we don't care. We don't care about how many reps you do because it's just the cherry on top. But as for the cake, the long head of the tricep exercise, it needs to be programmed properly. Then surprise, surprise, you do more shoulder isolation with dumbbell side laterals, 3 sets of 10, and then biceps dumbbell curls, 3 sets of 10. This is a good day. I won't modify much on this day beyond the wide grip push-up and the programming rep range for the overhead. I still want to point out that it's a lot of shoulder isolation, so if you wanted to do something else than the side laterals, like for example a forearm isolation, you absolutely can. This is day 5. By this point, the average person is really tired. This is why I told you that when you program for 7 days, you have to be very careful. Mike's strategy was to front load the volume and then temper down with the last 4 days. But I do believe that it's still too high volume and most people would not be able to handle it. Be it physically or psychologically, you're going to need a break. So if that's the case, you apply the advice I gave you to lower the volume and then you add an extra rest day after day 5. This is fine, it's not going to kill your gains. Recovery is very important as well. Another thing I want to point out is that just like there is on the lower body a big emphasis towards quad volume in a position with hamstring volume, so there are more knee flexions than there are hip hinges, you'll also notice with the program that there is much more bicep isolation than there is tricep isolation. This is also a bias of Mike and it can be corrected by you. You can just modify the program. If you don't, the long head of the tricep is going to be neglected and even the side of the tricep, because I'm sure that Mike did this because he believes, like many people do, that presses are enough for the tricep. They're not. Unless you're gifted, you're going to end up with spaghetti arms. So isolate your triceps. He makes you isolate the bicep because there is no compound lift in the entire program that has you train bicep, like a chin-up, for example. So he, I think, found it an obligation to have you isolate it. Apply the same logic for tricep. For day 6, you open with Smith machine feet forward squats, not a bad lift, 4 sets of 12. Then Smith machine calves, 7 sets of 12. Remember what I told you? 2 ways to do calves. High volume, medium frequency, high frequency, medium volume. Shit ton of volume, but you only do calves 2 days. So you can do that if you want. Maybe it's going to be some junk volume, but it's not terrible for calves, I believe, because it's a very resilient muscle group. Then you do dumbbell rear lateral raise, superset with dumbbell upright row. More shoulder, more traps. Do you really need to do that much? Maybe you can do more upright rows on this day with variation, but I'm not sure you need the lateral raises, especially because you did lateral raises on day 5. So again, back-to-back shoulder isolation. Natural lifters can handle that. Maybe people on PEDs, but people with a normal body, with a normal production of hormones, can handle that. So it's not a good idea. Then you do dumbbell occlusion curls. Again, you train biceps already on day 5, so pick one. Do biceps on day 5 or day 6, and then replace the other one by a long head of tricep exercise. And you do as fast as possible, which, hello, you're occluding the bicep. Why are you trying to move as fast as possible? Just for the pump? Again, Mike loves the pump. I don't think it's that important for hypertrophy. Just do a normal rep range, man, and just don't do the occlusion band. Just do normal curls, maybe a variation, maybe a pinwheel curl, maybe something different. And then you do some hanging knee raises. It's the first time he has you do abs without a machine, and it's a good exercise. So I'm not going to touch this one. But again, as fast as possible. Take a novice, make them hang from a bar and tell them, okay, give me knee raises as fast as possible, and you're going to witness someone who looks like they're having a seizure. Slow, controlled, let the stretch at the bottom, get the stretch from the abs, get the legs up in an explosive motion, then stretch down slowly again. This is how you grow your abs. So that was for day 6, and day 6 was, again, a lower body day, technically, with some upper body movements thrown into the mix. It's a good way to program, but it's still too much lower body volume. And a fun thing to do is compare day 6 and day 4. They're both lower body days. And you could tell me, well, day 6 is clearly longer than day 4. But if you look at the exercises, even though technically it's 2 lower exercises for day 6 and only 2 lower body exercises also for day 4 is much more fatiguing because of the types of exercises. This is what is known as fatigue to stimulus ratio, or stimulus to fatigue ratio, whatever you want to call it, which is something that Mike knows. In this case, the fatigue is much higher on day 4. Is it a good thing? Yes, because you're fresh. You're fresh from the rest day of day 3. That's a good thing. But it also means that throughout the program, the same logic can be applied. If you compare fatigue from day to day, you will find that the lower body days tend to be more fatiguing, which also means you're going to get more development of the lower body, but also a higher chance of overuse injury. So these are things that you have to keep in mind. This is why you always question the program before you run it. And then we're going to end this video with day 7, which is also a baby day. I think that having a baby day as day 7 is a good idea because it's the end of the program technically, but on day 1, which is just afterwards, you start again. You don't get a break after day 7. So if day 7 is dreadful, you're not going to have the juice to start anew. I want to mention here that some could tell me that the reason why the volume is so high is because you're only supposed to run the program for 5 weeks. But keep in mind one thing, high volume with or without a grace period at the end of just not doing the program anymore is still going to be junk. Just because you do the volume doesn't mean your body is going to respond to it. So if you can slash it down by 20 or 30%, it's a win. Because now you can run the program continuously without the need to just take deloads or completely stop the program, and it's going to be much more doable. So day 7 is a good example of that because you start with weighted pull-ups, 4 sets of 10, a little bit high in my opinion, I like 4 sets of 6 to 8 or 4 sets of 4 to 6, but it's good. Then you do some cable rows, which is a very easy exercise to do, not stressful at all, 3 sets of 15, then hamstrings, lying leg curls, 6 sets of 12, and then glute bridges, 3 sets of 15. That's what I call a baby day. It's easy, in and out, you're not going to take too much time, and you're going to feel fresh afterwards. If you want to run a 7 days a week program, this is what the days are supposed to look like. All of the days. This is why I slash most of the days, is because yes, you do too much. The days need to have, I believe, from 4 to 6 lines of set, and at least 4 of these lines need to be isolation movements that are not fatiguing. If you have every single day and you get people do 2 compound movements, then 4 isolations back to back to back to back, you're going to burn them out. So my overall critique of this hypertrophy program by Mike Israetel is that it is way too high volume. The volume needs to be lowered and the intensity needs to be slightly amped up for certain movements. On top of that, if you have paid attention, you will notice that the upper back is scarcely hit. You do pull-ups 2 times, you do some rows here and there, but that's not enough, especially if you're going to tout a 7 days a week program. You have the perfect opportunity to up upper back frequency, and therefore you absolutely must do it. The issue is that Mike put all of his eggs in the traps basket with tons of shrugs. Take those shrugs away. More horizontal movements without the lower back being involved. More vertical pulls. All of that is more important. Or else you're going to end up with traps up to here with massive shoulders, massive legs, and not much else. No triceps, etc. So it's not going to be a good look. The volume can be spread better, as I said, especially since it's not a strict upper-lower. And the way I would revamp the volume is, and it's going to give you a grace period as well because it's going to give you an extra rest day, what we can do is we can mix day 6 and day 7. Because most of day 6, I believe, is just overkill. You really don't need to do that much. So you mix the 2 days, you end up with something much more doable, and now you can have an additional rest day in the week, meaning that after day 6, instead of doing day 7, then day 1 again, you do day 6, then day 7 is also a rest day. And that is going to be much more doable. After that, you also replace or just add additional volume for the hamstrings and the back that can be taken away. If you look at the program again, there are some spaces like the Sumo deficit deadlift can be replaced. Some of the leg press volume on day 2 can be replaced by some hip hinges that are not too taxing, all of which would balance the leg much more because with a program like this, you're going to end up quad dominant, which could lead to some knee issues down the line. And all of that should help you fix this and help balance also the upper and lower body volume. Because, and it's the reason why I told you that your upper body days need to look like laundry lists and the lower days need to look shorter, is because you move much more weight with your lower body. So 4 sets of 1 exercise of lower body might equal in terms of tonnage 2 exercises of upper body. So if you end up with something like this, I don't know if you can see, well, the upper looks exactly like the lower, you're going to be in trouble. Something that needs to be mentioned, of course, is that the uppers tend to be strict uppers and the lowers tend to be hybrid, where you do a mix. But the problem is that in this case, the mix is lower body movements and then shoulders and traps and curls that you don't really need to be doing. So that space, as I said, can be utilized more intelligently with back volume and hamstring volume. And that is mainly going to be that for this day. So I've critiqued the program a ton, and you could tell yourself, wow, he hates it. No, actually, this is the second best program I've ever reviewed. Maybe first best. The only other guy that I liked is Nipped, which also means that the two guys are good at programming. It's just that I like to cherry pick and I like to point out the flaws in programs to help you guys develop a critical thinking and reasoning mind when it comes to actually looking at what your favorite influencers are going to produce for you. So overall, not a bad program. The skeleton of the program is sound. The idea of the 7 days a week is sound, but the actual application of said 7 days a week can be revamped, it can be done better, and I think that with all of the information I gave you, with the evolving rep ranges going down, with the slashing of some exercises, the replacing by others, you have all of the tools in your arsenal to turn this 7 days a week hypertrophy program into something great. Thank you for watching, have a good day.